Hi everyone, my name is Karen, this is my channel RatherBeReading, and today I'm bringing to you a recent reads video. So I filmed my last recent reads video exactly a week ago, and in the past week I have actually read a total of 7 books, which I'm very happy with. So let's jump straight in and just talk about all of the books that I have been reading recently. So the first book that I finished since the last time I checked in with you guys, which I think I mentioned as a currently reading book, was Pride and Prejudice and Zombies by Seth Grahame-Smith, together with obviously like original text from Jane Austen. I was hoping to really enjoy this. I was hoping that this was going to be like a real like fun romp of a book, and I was very disappointed. The main text and story follows the original Pride and Prejudice story pretty much exactly, which is fine, except that to me this added literally nothing new to the story. The zombies were just kind of put in there, and they're also in the book. It was never like properly explained or like put in properly in the story as to why zombies exist in this world. Now my cat is going to scratch on the scratching post. Giles. So yeah, to me, this didn't add anything to the original text, and I didn't like the writing. And the biggest problem I had with this, though, is that to me, by the end of the story, this had turned our great heroine, Elizabeth Bennet, into a bit of the I'm not like other girls type of trope, because in this book, Elizabeth Bennet is like a very great warrior of like zombie, zombie fighter, which I love because I love her being a badass heroine in like a new way. But by the end of the story, she's very like disdainful of like people who aren't as good warriors as her, and like she, not the women who aren't. I don't know, it was just very much felt like it turned Elizabeth Bennet into a bit of, like I said, they're like I'm not like other girls type of thing, which I didn't love either. So in the end, I end up giving this 2.5 stars, which, to be honest, is maybe a little generous. It maybe felt kind of like a 2-star for some of it, but I went with a 2.5. I then read a book called The Good Daughter by Honey Brown. This is a book that I had from the library, but I've already returned to the library. So this is a bit of a strange experience in reading, in that I've read one other book by Honey Brown, and that was a thriller novel. And in this book, when you read the synopsis, it talks about how it's about 2 characters, a boy and a girl, living in this like rural country town, and one of their mothers goes missing and the other one is implicated in the disappearance. And so you've kind of got this like mystery aspect like hinted at in the synopsis. So I thought this was going to be more thrillery in nature, and it's not. It's kind of a mystery, but more like dark, contemporary, like literary fiction, kind of, I guess, more so than anything else. I didn't love it the way that I was hoping to. I really liked the setting. I thought the author did a really great job of bringing this like really rural, it's an Australian book by an Australian author, always love that, and she did a great job of bringing this like really rural Australian setting to life. Like I really felt like I could imagine this like small town. It's also kind of historical because I think it's set in like the 80s, because there's a character who I think is supposed to be like 26, and at one point someone looks at his license and it shows that he was born in the early 60s. So I was like, okay, so this is in the past, but it didn't seem necessary for it to be set in the past, except maybe to explain away things like maybe them having had cell phones and stuff. I didn't really know why that was a thing either. Like I said, so I liked the setting. I also like the story is quite dark and gritty, which I always like. The main beef I had with this story is that it's very confusing. All the like mystery aspects of it is like such a side thing to what's actually going on with the characters, and then like when it gets touched on and you just have no idea what's actually going on in this mystery, to the point where it's confusing because you're like, is this actually a mystery? Like there's so many characters who seem to be alluding to the fact that they know what's happened, so you're like, is anyone actually trying to figure out what's going on here, or like we the only ones who don't know what's going on? Like it was all very, I didn't like that aspect of it. Like I said, but I thought the writing was good. I liked the setting. I liked how dark and gritty it was. Trigger warnings in this one for animal cruelty, just be aware of that. But it was just okay for me. I definitely would read more by this author. I checked Goodreads, and the thriller of hers that I'd read previously, I did give a 4-star. So would check out more from her. I gave this one 3 stars. I then finished an audiobook that I had been reading for a really long time because I'd been off work sick. So when I went back to work this past week, I finished it. And that was called Out of the Forest by Gregory P. Smith. This is a non-fiction memoir about a man. It's an Australian book again. It's about a man who had a very unconventional upbringing, come from a very poor background of a very kind of abusive family. And was put into care at one portion of his life, got very involved in drugs and alcohol, and at one point became, the synopsis kind of leads you to believe that the main part of the story is about him talking about how at one point he becomes like a recluse, like living illegally, like in a rainforest, kind of off the land. That is a very small portion of the story. Obviously, trigger warnings in this for drug and alcohol abuse, domestic abuse, all of those types of things. I hate critiquing memoirs because I'm obviously not critiquing their life or their life story. I can only critique the story, like the way that the memoir was written. And for me, I found this incredibly hard to connect to. The one thing that I did love about this is that it did talk a lot, because Gregory P. Smith eventually got a really great education and went to uni and became a professor, and is a known expert now on the forgotten generation or the forgotten kids or something, like, I can't remember exactly what the phrase is. It's the forgotten children, which is a generation of kids like him who were put into care, and the horrible abuse and things that went on in the 60s and 70s to kids who were put into care, and the really not great stuff that went on. And he became a leading expert on that, having experienced it and then doing a lot of research into it and all of those types of things, and a lot of studies and things shown to the government to get apologies from the government to all of these kids who were treated like this because of horrible funding and them just burying their head in the sand and not wanting to see what was being done, because a lot of these institutions were run quite religiously. So all of that aspect of things I didn't know a lot about, and I am Australian, so I liked learning a bit more about that part of Australian history that I didn't know a lot about. So I really did enjoy that portion, but the rest of it, like I said, I found it kind of hard to connect to the story. I should say as well, sorry, that this is narrated on audio by Dean Frisk, so it's not the perfect memoir for me, but I did take some things out of it, so I ended up giving that 3 stars. I then read Seeker by Kate Tiernan. It's the first book in this particular bind-up, which is the 4th bind-up, making it book 10 in the overall series. And this one is a little bit interesting in that we have a complete perspective shift in this one. The first 9 books in the series have all been told from the main character's perspective, and then in this, I'm not going to say who, but we have a shift, and all of a sudden we're being told the story from a different character's perspective. It's not like a time jump back where you get the whole books from the same story from their perspective. It's still sequentially, chronologically moving on. And so I didn't know how I felt about that, because we also kind of changed settings. This character is going off to do something else, and so we follow them doing that. And I get it. I get kind of why it happened, but at the same time it just felt very jarring after 9 books in one character's head to then randomly be thrust into this other point of view. It was a little bit, I don't know, it was just a bit jarring. I did think that the different perspective was well done in that it didn't feel like the same character talking, which is always good. I don't feel like a lot happened, and I don't know that this story was particularly necessary, but I still enjoyed it for the most part. So in the end, I gave this one a 3.25 star rating. I then read another audiobook. I listened to The Lost Flowers of Alice Hart by Holly Ringland. This is another Australian book by an Australian author. My library gets a lot of Australian authored books in on audio, which is great. So this is a literary fiction novel about a little girl named Alice. At the start of the story, she's about 9 years old, and she comes from she lives in a kind of a rural-ish area with her mother and her father and her parents. She comes from an abusive home, and then there is this great tragedy that takes place, and she ends up moving to live with her grandmother on a flower farm, and there she starts to learn the language of flowers, which is like the way that in Victorian times people would use flowers to communicate certain things. Like different flowers had different meanings. And then we kind of follow Alice's life. We follow her for about 20 years. We follow her from when she's 9 right through until she's kind of in her like late 20s, and different trials and tribulations that kind of come up for her. I mainly enjoyed this book. There's a lot about this book that I really enjoyed. I liked the writing. I wrote down for you the opening line of this book because I love a great opening sentence in a book, and this one's a great one. So the opening sentence is, "In the weatherboard house at the end of the lane, 9-year-old Alice Hart sat at her desk by the window and dreamed of ways to set her father on fire." Like, if that isn't a great opening line, I don't know what is. Trigger warnings in this one for not only it's for domestic abuse, but not only for that, but also for like kind of anxiety and panic attacks. So I really liked the writing. I loved all of the stuff about the flowers and the different meanings of flowers and things that they could have, and the way I thought the author did a great job of tying that into all of the different parts of the story and all of the different like time periods of Alice's life. I really liked that. I also liked the way that it kind of showed how history can sometimes repeat itself in ways depending on how you were brought up and the ways that things that you were maybe exposed to when you're a kid, and how that can sometimes repeat itself, and how we can end up in a cycle, and ways that we can maybe break those cycles. The main gripe I have with the book is that this is very much a story of, at points, characters keeping things from other characters, and I hated it, especially because the way it was done was just like the secret that's being kept, which like we as the reader know what it is. It's just like the main character who's not being told like this kind of like secret, was just infuriating because it made zero sense to me as a reader as to why this secret was being kept. Like, I just wasn't buying it. Like, why is this happening? So I didn't like that part of the story, but for the most part, I did enjoy a lot about this story, and I ended up giving it 3.5 stars. I then read The Foxhole Caught by Nora Sakavic. So this is a book. So this is one of my Kindle backlist books. So I think I actually mentioned on my TBR that my Kindle backlist book was going to be, I think it's A Thorn Among the Lilies by Michael Hybert. But I had mentioned that I had discovered in preparing for that video that it was actually the 3rd book in a series, and my library does have the 1st and 2nd books. So I'm going to get those from the library, and then once I've read those, I'll then move on to the 3rd one. And so the next Kindle backlist book that I had, so we're actually getting into the Kindle backlist books now that I've aren't just like random, oh my God, this is for free, and just purchasing it, even though it was just books that I had no idea anything about them. These are books more now that we're getting into that I'd actually heard something about at some point, was interested in, and so had purchased like more intentionally. So Foxhole Caught is the first book in a trilogy, and it's one of those series that I've heard quite a few different people talk about on BookTube, and everyone who it's probably underrated in that you hear some people talk about it, but it's not like widely loved. It's self-published. But the people who you do hear talk about it love this series. It gets so much praise. So I had really high expectations kind of going into this. So this is kind of a new adult series. It follows a main character named Neil, who we know from the get-go has secrets in his past that he's kind of trying to hide. He's kind of trying to fly under the radar and stay hidden for certain reasons. And in this story, there is a sport called Exie, which I think is described as being a cross between like soccer and lacrosse. And it's like a big sport there. And Neil basically ends up being recruited to play in this like college Exie team, which he's glad about because he loves Exie, like it's something he's really passionate about, but it's going to mean that kind of his cover is potentially going to be an issue because he's going to be like exposed like on TV and things, and like it might like blow his cover type of thing. It's like the main gist of this story. So I enjoyed this book for the most part, but I had some problems with it. I found the setting very confusing. It is set in our world And at first I thought the only difference was that there's this like fictional sport called Exy, which again, little gripe with that is that Exy isn't well explained. Like, I am a sports fan in that I'm not great at playing sports, but I love watching sports. I love watching sports. And so I really wanted more information. And this is probably just me. And if it had been in there, a lot of other readers probably would have been like, oh, so boring. But I'm like, tell me about this sport. How does the scoring work? How do the positions work? You know, what is it? Like, how does it relate to soccer? I'm a big soccer fan. Like, how does it? I just wanted to know more about the sport. But it's not just the sport. There are other things kind of happening in this book that don't seem to be like our world, but it's just not well expanded on. And I don't know if I was just imagining it and that they're not actually different from our world and is just literally supposed to be our world except for this sport. But I was confused. I found that whole the setting thing really threw me off and I was confused about it. And then... I don't feel like a lot happened, if I'm being honest. I feel like it was good setup moving into future books. And the main thing, like, this is not a plot story. It's character. This is character focused. It's all about the characters. And I did really enjoy the characters. We've got a lot of characters with a lot of interesting personality traits, a lot of really flawed characters. And I think moving on, I'm just going to grow to love these characters even more and even more and even more. But so yeah, for me, I enjoyed this book and I thought it was good setup and I'm looking forward to reading more moving forward, but it wasn't the amazing book that I was kind of hoping for. So in the end, I gave it 3.5 stars. And then so moving on to the final book that I read in this past week, which was We Set the Dark on Fire by Taylor K. Mejia. This is another one that I listened to on audio, is narrated by Kyla Garcia. This is a YA... Well, it's flagged on Goodreads as being like fantasy. I wouldn't think of this as fantasy. To me, it was dystopian. It's basically set in a world that's like our world. Okay, we'll get into it. So it is Hispanic, kind of inspired, which I really liked. And it's basically in this world where, a dystopian world, I think, where men, powerful men in this world basically get 2 wives, and women are like trained up to be like one of these 2 wives, and they get 2 wives. One is to be their kind of like partner in life who like helps them with their like careers and their political lives, and to be the person who like stands by them and runs their household and all of that. And then the second wife, who is the lighting in this video is terrible, I apologize. I don't want to get up to fix it. The second wife, who is the one who's like the more sexy wife, who's there to like be the mother of his children and all of that type of thing. So, but apart from that, it's kind of set like, it just felt dystopian. If it's supposed to be fantasy, whatever, to me it felt dystopian. So this is an LGBT novel. It has a female-female relationship in it. And we're basically following a female main character who is picked to be a wife, the wife who's like the political wife who like stands by his side, runs his household, etc. And then she is living a like secret in that she comes from a much poorer upbringing than what she has led people to believe. And there's like a class struggle in the book, and she basically is like they want her to be a spy for the like lower classes. So to me, this book didn't bring anything new to the table. It's literally a story I feel like I've read 4 or 5 times, except that the world was Hispanic inspired and the LGBT, like female-female romance, which I liked. I really liked having those 2 things being a part of the story. But apart from those 2 things, this book just added nothing new. It felt like a book that I'd read like 5 times before. I also found that the romance was very up and down. I feel like the romance went from like 0 to 100, where like nothing had happened, and then all of a sudden it was like, oh my god, I'm so 100% infatuated with this person and I can't stop thinking about them and I want to be with them forever and just, I can't stop thinking about them. And then it was like, next chapter, whoa, 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 went too fast there, can't trust this person at all, can't trust them. And I'm like scaling it back, and I don't know how I feel about them now because, you know, I don't know how I feel about someone if I can't trust them. And then next chapter, I just can't stop thinking about them. We were very, very up and down, and I found that incredibly off-putting. So this is the first book in at least a duology. I don't know how many books there's going to be. Also, the kind of like big cliffhangery, twisty part of the ending, the book was just incredibly predictable. Like I said, I felt like I'd read this book like 5 times before, just with a female romance added in there, which is fair. So I gave this 3 stars. It's the type of book that if the sequel comes up like on my audiobook app, I'll probably borrow it and listen to it, but I wouldn't go out of my way to read further on in the series, if you know what I mean. So those are the 7 books that I read recently. Okay, I just tried to fix the lighting and knocked my camera over so we have a completely different angle. The lighting's still not really fixed. I've got these weird sunspots. I'm gonna have to sort this out because I've got a couple more videos to film today. I don't know what's going on with the lighting today. But yeah, those are all of the books that I've read recently. I would love to chat with you guys in the comments down below if you've read any of the books that I've read, if you've got any thoughts on them, or I'd love to chat about what you guys have been reading recently. I just love having chats down in the comments, so let's comment and let's chat. Please like this video if you liked it. Please subscribe if you want to see more from my channel. That is all I have for this video today. Bye guys!